Is it working? Okay. Yes, I do love to do that. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tom Coates, and welcome to the Richmond Ions Community Group monthly meeting for the month of June 2022. For background material, Ions itself is a 501c3 organization that was created by Edgar Mitchell back in 1973. Edgar Mitchell was the lunar landing module pilot for Apollo 14, and had a PhD in aeronautical engineering, I believe. And he, like those several of the other fellows who walked on the moon during the Apollo program, had his own takeaway from the experience. His was when he was on the return journey to Earth and saw the Earth as a pale blue dot off in space. He had a unity consciousness experience. And this was a motivation or an incentive or a trigger for him to want to spend the rest of his life pursuing the frontiers of consciousness rather than space and so forth. And so he did that. He resigned his commission from the Navy, and in I think July or so of 1973 began Ions as a vehicle for that, with a focus on the interface between science and spirit. And as most of you know, Ions has community groups all over the world, mostly in the English-speaking world, but all over the United States and Canada, Europe, Australia, and I think maybe one in Hong Kong, I'm not sure. And I'm very pleased to say that no community groups that I'm aware of in the entire Ions network, notwithstanding that our numbers are somewhat down as a result of the impact of COVID, no community groups has the level of programs that we do here in Richmond, and we've been blessed to have a group who has got itself together back in January 1996, and has somehow by hook or by crook stayed together over all these 26 something years, and so we have a steering committee that is very active. Our speaker today is on our steering committee, Carole Louie, also Bunny Cairo Justin, Sally Youngs, who's in the back, she's our treasurer, and Elizabeth Kuhn, who is our web person. And an unofficial member of our steering committee is our technical guy, Dan O'Neill, who never comes to steering committee meetings, but he's without Dan, we wouldn't be able to put on these meetings and be on Zoom like we are. So, oh, and Martha Mullen, I'm sorry, Martha's over in the corner and hard to see from my vantage point without my glasses particularly. But yeah, Martha Mullen. And thanks to Martha, we have this wonderful venue that when we got kicked out of our last one, she was able to arrange this one. So anyway, as I say, we as far as I know, are the only group who was able to maintain our programs through the COVID period. As soon as COVID came along, we went from live programs because we lost our venue and lost our legal right to meet, I guess, under the governor's edict, and so we started meeting on Zoom. We were meeting on Zoom exclusively from April of 2020 through May of 2021. Is that right? And then we resumed in person in June of 2021, and we've had both in person and on Zoom ever since then. And so we welcome all those who join us both locally and from afar in Zoom land. We've got we picked up a few people during the Zoom period from across the country, some in California, where our meeting flyers are being circulated now to the Houston groups and also to the Austin group, and we welcome them. And so we really have been blessed, and we hope that will continue. I would also urge anyone who's not a member of IONS to consider joining it. It has become much more of an open and accessible organization. I'm pleased to say during the COVID period, which could be also called the Zoom period, I guess. And they have a weekly program that's on Zoom every Friday afternoon at 2:00 Eastern time. It lasts for about an hour and 15 minutes, and many of those programs are really excellent. They also have developed a lot of other programs that are multiple session seminars and so forth that are on Zoom that they did not have before COVID. And so I would urge and you don't even have to be a member, by the way, to join into the Friday programs. But some of the others I think you do. But either way, it's an inexpensive thing to join, and I would urge anybody who might have an interest to do that. No membership is required of course, for participation in our programs here. The only participation requirement for membership here is just showing up for our meetings, either in person or on Zoom. And I would also mention to those who may not know, today, for the first time since 2019, we are resuming what we used to be called our spring fling, and it still is. We have 2 more days of spring left, I think, and so that's going to take place this afternoon at my house at 525 Sleepy Hollow Road. There is a flyer on the table for those who didn't necessarily get one in the mail. Anybody who's here who's not been here before and who's not on our list, I urge you to put your name on the yellow pad back in the back. Bunny, in case you hadn't been reading your emails, I sent out a correction. Oh, okay. All right. Well, those who picked it up today and didn't see it before, the party is tonight, not last night, and you're all invited to come. Huh? They didn't miss the party. It's tonight. It's Saturday the 18th, which happens to be today. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I didn't realize I'd put out the wrong one. That's the only one I have with me. But what other announcements? Anything? Okay. As I said a moment ago, we've been blessed through the years to have wonderful speakers that have been the core of our programs through the years, and today is no exception to that general rule. Carole Louie, I first met, I think, in 2007 or 8, and she'd been in Richmond 3 or 4 years at that point. She'd come up here because she had grandchildren here, and she was a speaker for us the first time 9 or 10 years ago in reference to her first book, right? Let's see, Conversations with a Hungry Ghost, right? And since then, she's written several more books. Most recently, one called Memoir of a Time Traveler, and which caused me to break my arm back in January. She just gave me this book, and I was walking out to my car, and I tripped because I looked down at the cover of the book when I should have been looking where I was walking, and I broke my arm, my right arm, in 3 places. I was very disabled, and so to pay me back for that, Carole is speaking today. We had another speaker lined up, and named Dane Wigington, and some conflicts with scheduling conflicts developed in recent times with Mr. Wigington, and so we were desperate to find a substitute, and Carole stepped up to the plate and had a talk almost all ready to go that she was planning to deliver somewhere else, and so we again, the blessings continue when you just put your arms there and say, universe, bring it on. So Carole has become not just a prolific author, but a real luminary and star in the spiritual community in Richmond and far beyond Richmond. And so she's talking today on a subject called Quieting the Unquiet Dead, Demystifying Spirit Attachment. This is for what would historically be called possession, or what I would call hitchhikers and so forth. And so she's developed some wonderful material on it. And without further ado, I give you Carole Louie. Thank you.
How's that? Thank you so much. It's been quite a journey since I last spoke here in 2017. And if you had told me then I'd be doing what I'm doing now, I would not have believed you. But, when you open up to where the universe is guiding you, magical things happen. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of those things that have happened. I want to focus today on the spirit releasement ideology. And actually, this is quite different the way I learned it a few months ago from depossession or exorcism. And I'll tell you why that's so. When I wrote the book, Conversations with a Hungry Ghost, I actually start off with going into the 10th hell of the Buddha. That's where I discovered my father when I began communicating with him. And I probably should have had an idea that I'd be doing this kind of work then, but sometimes we dig our heels in and resist doing things. But in 2011, I had another clue that this is probably my work. You might remember that the Tibetan Buddhist monks came to the Stewart School and did a sand mandala. But at that sand mandala ritual, they also did the Hungry Ghost dance. And I was so excited about what they were doing with the Hungry Ghost dance. It really resonated with me that I went back the next day and talked to them and told them about my experience with Hungry Ghosts. Which is what my father was when I saw him in the 10th hell. And they said, only certain monks are even allowed to do the dance of the Hungry Ghost. You have to have certain abilities and certain skills. And then he turned around and looked at me and he said, you were one of those monks in another life. So I still resisted. I had other things that I wanted to work on. And the universe let me dabble in the shallow end of the pool until this past year. And then we get to take a deeper dive. Now, after the Hungry Ghost came out, I had a schism with a friend. And then I had another schism with another friend. And I pay attention when these things happen because they show me patterns. And if you're familiar with shadow work, schisms are an indication of that there's some shadow work to be done. And so I, first of all, want to emphasize that even though these schisms happened, because of the work that I do in past life regression therapy and mediumship, I have no judgment about any of these things. But I focus on what can I do when another person is not willing to meet me halfway, and what can I do to heal myself? Because I know that anything is trying to show me something about myself. I was guided at that time to Ho'oponopono. Are any of you familiar with that? It's a wonderful Hawaiian word, which means to make doubly right, and there's many, many practices about that. We'll come back to Ho'oponopono a little bit later. So one morning in 2020, I was woken by my guides. Usually they wake me up between 3 and 5 in the morning when the circadian rhythms are really high. And when that happens, and especially if I hear very clear words, then I know, okay, no use trying to go back to sleep, get up and focus, meditate. And the words were spiritual hypnosis in this instance. So I get online, do a Google search, and I find a book called Spiritual Hypnosis by Holly Meredith Holmes. Now, I knew Holly Meredith Holmes because I met her in 2002. Back then, most of my career was as an interior designer, and I was thinking about leaving the design field to go into hypnotherapy. So I did a good search to find a hypnotherapy school, and I found HCH, which was run by Holly Holmes Meredith. It's out in California, and so I have family there. And I went out and she let me sit in on a class. I did a session with a new student. I did a session with a teacher, and I had actually a mystical experience after all of those sessions. So I was determined I was going to leave my interior design job the next year and go out and do the training. But the universe had other plans. And that was the year that I developed environmental illness. So instead of doing the training that I wanted to do, I was in the ER 3 times addressing environmental illness. So in a way, I kind of tie into the talk that we were going to have today, because I have experienced what that is like. I actually used regression therapy and hypnosis to help myself heal from the environmental illness. So I had a group of friends who were focused on that, and I went through a healing process much faster than they did. So today what I want to do is focus on demystifying what many people call dark energies and evil energies and entities. I hope at the end of the talk, that you'll have a slightly different perspective about them. And as many people as there are here and also on Zoom, if you could see with my eyes, you know we're not alone. You might even be able to feel them. You know, that wispy feeling of goosebumps, feeling like you've been touched, especially if you feel a cold touch. That's usually an indication of a lower energy. So because of that, what I like to do is create a sacred space. I told Tom that instead of doing the meditation at the beginning of the talk, we'll actually do a couple. This will be one. So if you can just focus on your breath, we will do the white light of protection to prepare us to create this sacred space. And you can do this wherever you are, anywhere, anytime. Using your creative imagination, imagine that you have a miniature sun, just like the one in our solar system, but this one is deep in your solar plexus, under your rib cage. This sun is radiating through every atom and cell of your being. It fills you with light all the way to the tips of your fingers, the top of your head, and to the soles of your feet. It shines through you and beyond you, an arm's length in every direction, above your head, below your feet, out to your sides, creating an aura, a brilliant, dazzling, radiant, white light that surrounds and protects you. And everyone in this room and everyone on the Zoom meeting. If you are uncomfortable at any time, bring your awareness back to this white light and continue to expand it through your body. Good. Now, if at any time you're triggered during the talk, just make a note of it. Don't try to suppress it, just make a note of it, bring your awareness to it, and we can talk about that later. And if you have any questions about what you hear today, what I want you to do is go within yourself and ask yourself, what is my truth? You don't need to take everything that I say as the gospel. I trust your higher self to guide you through your process of discernment. If you have any questions during the talk, you can put your questions in the chat room and Dan will help us address those. I'm going to leave plenty of time for questions, or you can write them down. I'm going to go to the slides. Slide number 4, please. Yeah, sorry, I didn't cue you. Okay. Before we begin, I want to tell you a little bit about Marco Antonio de Dominius. He's the only past life that I've been able to get the full name for, and actually lots of documentation about him. I wrote about him in my book, Unstuck in Time, Memoir of a Time Traveler. And Marco Antonio was a contemporary of Galileo. That's where I wanted to bring him in today's talk. Galileo actually went to Marco Antonio's trial during the Inquisition, and because of what he heard at Marco Antonio's trial, Galileo decided that he would recant some of his works, and he was still held under house arrest. But that made a shift in how Galileo presented his works. Now, just as people used to think that the sun revolved around the earth until Copernicus and Galileo showed otherwise, it'll go away. People resisted that thought. And I'm feeling that also people are resisting the thought about letting go of old ideas about good and evil and about dark spirits. And so by doing the training that I did, and also all of the conversations that I've had with the many ghosts and past lives, they've shown me so much more about what evil looks like than I ever imagined or dreamed possible. And even though it took the Catholic Church over 300 years to make amends with Galileo, they didn't do this until October 31st in 1992, when John Paul II expressed regret for the way that Galileo had been treated. I feel like with the internet, with our computer systems, we are now on a faster track. And so it's calling us to be open to change. Next slide, please. The two main sources that I'm going to be talking about today, which is part of the training that I went through, are Dr. Edith Fiore's book, The Unquiet Dead, and so that's where I borrowed her title to title this talk, and also William Baldwin's book, Spirit Releasement Therapy, which has become a manual for this type of training. And for those of you who are in the mental health practitioners, many people, including the psychologists that I worked with when I began doing this work, trained with him to understand the difference between a psychotic break and a spiritual awakening. Next slide. I have to share this one little story about when I was opening up about, I went to the acupuncturist, and I had a great relationship with the acupuncturist. He knew I was more metaphysical than many of his clients. And so one day he was saying to me that, oh, in this meridian, you have an attachment. And I thought, oh, okay, that's interesting. I wasn't aware of it. And he told me the Chinese name for this attachment was hung on. Gets even better. My father's Chinese name was hung on. So what we're going to do to start off today, you should have a handout. If you didn't get the handout, we can pass one to you. And so what we're going to do is to start off doing a body scan. So and you don't even need the handout to start out with, but when you do this exercise, then you might want to make a note of what you experience on the handout. That's all right. It just goes away. Okay. And for those of you who are on Zoom, follow the slide. So just begin. Set your intention, first of all. You may feel like, oh, I don't know how to do this. But just set your intention and you'll be surprised what comes up. Start at the top of your head and just allow your attention to move through your body. And notice if you feel anything that feels sticky, dense, maybe even jagged, pointed, dark, or a color. If you notice a color, really bring your awareness to that color. And notice if the color also has a shape. Sometimes our souls talk to us through symbols, and the shape can be very revealing, and I'll share more about that later. And now notice if you have any thoughts or emotions. Sometimes it takes a little while for that all to register, but by setting the intention now, then you can just allow it to come up as it comes up. And then not only in your physical body, but many of you are energy workers and you are aware of your energy bodies, bring your awareness to the energy body. And if you've not done that before, then just set your intention again on your energy bodies. And pay attention to how you feel as you expand 6 inches out from your body, 12 inches out, 3 feet. Just notice whatever comes to your mind. And now if you had any emotions or thoughts come up, and especially if there's anything that is of discomfort, on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being the least amount of discomfort and 10 being the most discomfort, what level of discomfort do you experience? And if anyone would like to share their experience, we can take a few comments. Were you able to see colors? Yeah, Susanna. So Susanna noticed a white, jagged experience in her throat. Did you have a feeling with that? Okay. And yeah. Good. So she said she has some asthma and is feeling some tension in the throat area. And Martha? You actually felt a tapping on your chest. Wonderful. Yeah, like I said, we're not alone. Wonderful. Thank you all for sharing. We'll come back to that at the end. Oh yeah, does anyone want to share from the internet? Ask them if they could put it in the chat. That will help you from not stopping it.
Okay, so anyone on Zoom, if you'd like to put a question or an experience in chat, I'll see it. Thanks.
And while that's happening, anyone else? Yeah, so we've got 3 people with throat area congestion. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, and I could actually feel that before the day started. I tune into you before I do my talks energetically, and I could feel that before we got started. So we won't leave that unattended, but we'll do that at the end. So again, what I really want to focus on is demystifying spirit releasement. We have a question, a comment? Oh, that's actually a really beautiful energy. Keep holding that energy for all of us.
That was from Zoom. I see and feel turquoise around the head and heart.
Beautiful, thank you. So how is spirit releasement therapy different from depossession or an exorcism? Many of you have probably seen the movie Exorcist, and there are a lot of movies in that genre that, you know, sensationalize the whole possession thing. But the way that spirit releasement therapy is different is that last word, therapy. We approach it as a healing modality. So rather than trying to cast off demons or even spiriting them to the light, as you know, if you saw that series Medium, she was always shooing spirits to the light. We don't operate that way. We actually engage them in conversation because they're there for a reason. They're calling to be healed. And the healing, and something about the subject that they are attaching to, you know, that saying like attracts like. There's something about that subject that is also calling to be healed. And this grosser way of experiencing it is one way to get your attention to it. So it's a healing process for both the spirit and the person who has the attachment. You don't have to be clergy, you don't have to be a shaman. Anybody can do this as long as you know the protocol. As long as you practice being in that space. As I mentioned earlier with the Tibetan monks, only certain monks were allowed to do the hungry ghost dance. And you have to have a strong constitution in order to do this work. So, as I mentioned, it's a healing process for both. And I would actually even say not just both, but for many. In our work, we see it as a quantum healing process, because very often there's more than one spirit who has a like energy that's in the process. And what we do when we see that happens is we call on a leader, and by allowing that leader to speak for the group, it does healing work for the whole group. And I had that experience in one of my training sessions. Can we go to slide 8, please? So words are important. Words have different connotations for everyone. And I learned this in interior design because a word that I thought was very applicable to this project, a client had a beautiful oriental rug. The dominant color in it was dusty rose. But just using that word dusty rose for that client gave her a memory of her aunt, and it wasn't a pleasant memory. So I realized I can't use that word with her. The second dominant color in there was a raspberry color. As soon as I shifted wording to raspberry instead of dusty rose, all of a sudden everything was all good. I didn't change the design plan, I just changed the wording. And Marco Antonio showed me also that this was important. He was involved with the writing of the King James Bible in the 1600s. And so he showed me that words and their connotations are really important. Then in 2010, I met Kirsten Swenson, who wrote Bible Babble. She happens to be a professor here at VCU, and her book had just come out. And she really showed me the importance of words in the Bible. For instance, the word demon. Though you can see the transition from the English word to the Latin word to the Greek word to the Hebrew word, and the word demon actually came from what they were calling people who were protective spirit, a lower deity. That's very different than the connotation that we think of today, isn't it? And I couldn't figure out how they use the word as genius, but someone who's better at etymology than I am can do that. And then there's the word devil. And the word devil really means accuser, slanderer, when you break it down to its origin. The word Lucifer, people think of Lucifer as being synonymous with Satan. But again, the word Lucifer was referring to the morning star, the name of the king of Babylon at the time, who was considered an enemy by the Jewish people. And so they considered him the king of the heathens. And so it took on a negative connotation in that way. But let's move beyond those connotations. And let's get into more non-dualistic thinking. So because I'm half Chinese and I've studied a lot of the Chinese ways of thinking and the yin-yang principle, yin-yang can look at positive and negative and not think of it negatively in the way that Western cultures do, that it takes both energies to create a force in nature. Next slide. Okay, so it's good to know what kinds of energy attachments there are. The most common is a glummed on energy. Now think about your experience when you came into this room. Did you feel good when you were entering in the room and then all of a sudden you felt, uh-oh, this is going to be a dark subject? Did you feel an ominous feeling? I actually sprayed the room with lavender mist before you all came in to clear the energy. So I hope you felt good energy when you came in. But, bring your awareness to when you go into spaces that if you were feeling good before you went into the space and then you didn't feel good as soon as you walked in, maybe an energy has glommed onto you. And I think of it like nettles or Velcro tape. And if you have just a little bit of glomming on of energy, that's, maybe it's a minor annoyance, but it's okay. But the more of that you gather, the more of an annoyance it becomes. And if you're an empathetic person, I know I work with a lot of people who are empaths. You're more susceptible to that. So it's good for those folks to create a spiritual hygiene practice. So negative collective consciousness, and boy, are we experiencing that now, right? In fact, I really feel like the pandemic was created because of the negative collective consciousness of fear. I felt it long before it came in, and that's why I have this image up. I said, wait a minute, what's this energy I'm feeling? And I could see Pigpen with his little dust around him, and then it got bigger and bigger and bigger. So as we do not attend to our negative thoughts, even the subconscious negative thoughts, it builds up into a collective consciousness. Next slide. Anybody seen the series Ghost? That's such a funny series. So not all discarnate beings are negative. Some of them, really want to just have somebody to hang out and talk with, and if you are open, they'll come and find you. If you don't have good boundaries, they'll find you. And then the other thing is, if you've been ill, they'll find you. Or if you've been out of balance. So that's one of the reasons why my business is the center, and my logo is always come back to the center, because when you're centered and balanced, you don't have these kinds of issues. Yeah, now we get into the heavy stuff, the dark energies. These are discarnate beings who have had negative or evil lifetimes, and not just maybe one lifetime, but many lifetimes. And so they perpetuated that evil energy. They haven't learned how to heal it yet. And I've had a few of those to deal with as well. They really like to find other people who are evil. So think about someone you might know that you think of who does evil things or thinks evil thoughts or says evil things. They have a propensity to attract that kind of energy. Sometimes I wonder if it's them speaking or an entity that they've allowed to speak through them. That's a whole nother topic. And yeah, that's okay. Then there's extraterrestrials and interdimensional beings. Now that really gets into my whole field. And I'll share this one experience that happened during the practicum when I was doing the hypnotherapy training in 2020. We were actually doing dream work, but I had been plagued by a dream that was, I woke up out of it and had a very, very unpleasant feeling. So I was really happy to focus on it during the dream work. And when I did, the dream took me to an experience of a past life where I was a young woman who had been captured by an evil person, held in a cave and tortured. And evidently he had a pattern of doing this. He had a wall of trophies from all the people that he had captured and tortured until they died. And he liked to take them to the brink of death and bring them back and, you know, keep torturing. I know it sounds awful. And believe me, if this triggers you, see me afterwards because we need to talk. Yeah. But my therapist, I was the subject, and the person who was doing this had some experience with soul retrieval and spirit releasement. So I was paired up with the perfect person. And what had happened was she asked me to ask for someone on higher energy to come in and help. And all of a sudden, Gandalf showed up. Now, I'm not a hobbits person, so I'm looking at him very strangely because, you know, I just don't resonate with him, but there he was. And we were asking him to help us with this character. And the next thing I know, this being, so he looked like a man in this past life, and then he shed his skin and he looked something more like that. An extraterrestrial, and now I'm really scared. And so we asked Gandalf, you know, what can we do to help this? And he looks perplexed too, and now I'm angry. And I said, we need to speak to your boss. And so we did. We called in his boss, and this beautiful woman came in, and she looked at this extraterrestrial and she said, oh, we have been looking all over the galaxy for you. I cannot make this stuff up. And she zapped him, put him in a capsule, and put him in her put the capsule in her bundle at her waist. And so she thanked us, and we were able to go about our business. I never would have expected something like that to happen, but it showed me how that fear that I had from the dream was just one layer of showing me the past life, which was just one layer showing me the energy that I must have been tuned into what that energy was of that extraterrestrial. Now, beings choose not to go into the light for a variety of reasons. So next slide, please. And according to Dr. Edith Fiore, one of the first reasons is confusion. And this is what happened with my dad. As soon as he crossed over, he created a mahjong game, a perpetual mahjong game. And then something happened in the mahjong game. The universe knows how to get our attention, both us in the physical world, but also in the non-physical world. And so they got his attention in the mahjong game, and then that's what sent him into the 10th hell. Next. So if you've seen the movie What Dreams May Come, there's a lot of good information about what happens on the other side. And I like how they do it because it's not so sensationalistic. There's a lot of truth in that movie. And so Robin Williams got to experience some things that happened with amazement. But then his wife, who was left behind and who later committed suicide, she created a whole different world than he did. And then he became a bridge for her. He was not going to leave her there. And so very courageously, he went in there. And that's a beautiful scene too. If you have not seen it, or you might want to watch it again, it's a great movie. What Dreams May Come with Robin Williams. And the book is even better, by the way. And to think that, these topics are being covered in the media in this way. There's so many things that are coming out of late that's also telling me that on a collective consciousness level, we are expanding. Okay, yeah, curse. So many people have read the Bible, but did you know that in the Bible there's really a lot of admonitions about not giving a curse? And in one verse it says, if you give a curse, it will go down to your third or fourth generations. And from a reincarnationist point of view, I wonder if that's giving us a clue that, yeah, you're going to experience your own curse. Think about it. Next one. So some spirits, when they cross over on the other side, don't want to acknowledge that they're dead, but also they don't want to acknowledge that they're dead because they're afraid they're going to go to hell, especially ones who know that they have done evil deeds. And this is why they go about creating these mental constructs that is anything but what they know that they should experience. And that's what happened with my father. He created the Mahjong game, but once he had that moment during the Mahjong game and realized that, oh, my deeds have caught up with me, then that whole thing dissipated and he put himself in the 10th hell of the Buddha. Tenth hell, right. Some people think that there are just 10 hells. Some people say there are hundreds of hells. And I feel like we can't pigeonhole it. There are an infinite number of possibilities. But there was a time when people were trying to organize things, and so that's what the Buddhists did at that time, labeled the 10th hell, and each hell has a particular topic that it covers. So obsessions. If you have an obsession with a person or a place, you'll have a propensity to recreate that place in your non-physical world experience, or actually be attracted to go back to that space. And I know there's a bunch of those beings in the Shako Bottom area, because every time I go down there, I get the heebie-jeebies. And one of these days, I'm going to go down there and talk to. Is there? Oh yeah. I know. I've got to explore that one of these days. Next slide. Next slide. This is one of the biggest reasons why I particularly see spirit attachments. And I got to experience this up close and personal with my husband, who had a substance abuse problem and PTSD. And I'll never forget one time when I was talking to him and I knew I wasn't talking to him. He had a look in his eye that was you know, we'd probably call it demonic. It was so bad that I couldn't go home that night. I called a friend and I spent the night with someone else. And so because he had these substance abuse problems, he attracted lower energies. I was thrilled though when in 2015 I was doing the Brian Weiss training, because I wondered, why did I attract this husband? And he wasn't the only one. I've been married 3 times, so this was husband number 3, but husband number 1 also had substance abuse problems, which is why I divorced him. And I thought, why am I attracting these people in my life? And so sure enough, what happens? I remembered a past life when I did everything. I was not a nice person. And in the training though, I got to do a life between life experience. And we went to her life, her name was Josie, during the 20s. We went to her life and then we went to the afterlife. And evidently she had had an epiphany just before she died. And so her afterlife experience was awesome. She was in with a group of other addicts in this auditorium-like setting. Angelic beings stood around, held the energy for them, and they began to, first their energies had been all shriveled up, you know, kind of think about the way prunes are, and as the angelic beings were sending them energy, they began to become revitalized. And then this being came out on center stage and he opened his mouth, but this sound came out that I cannot even begin to describe. And now all of a sudden, her light began to shine. And it really, you know, I don't have to convince Dan. Dan and I both love sound healing. And so this showed me the efficacy of sound healing. And if the best way I know how to describe the sound that I heard in that experience was, if you've heard the musician Raphael and Angels of the Deep. So he embeds whale and dolphin music with his music. And that was the closest thing I've been able to find to the sound that I heard in that session. And then on the way back, I was hearing that the VA hospital here in Richmond was actually beginning to do studies with sound healing therapy for people who had addictions. How cool is that? Okay, unfinished business. Some of the stories I'm telling you about past lives, but there's a lot of crossover between past lives and spirit releasement or spirit attachment. And in this story, the unfinished business, Jenny Cockrell's story about, from a very, very early age, she began talking about this life and a lot of details. She drew pictures. Her book is absolutely fascinating. Yesterday's Children. And there's actually even a movie out about it that starred James Seymour. And really, really very well done. And because this persisted from her childhood into her adulthood, it wouldn't let her go. So in a way, that's an attachment. And that's what happened with me as well. And she was able to find that family. Now they were grown, but she was able to reunite with those children that she had left behind and was so concerned about in that other life. It's a beautiful story. And then there's revenge. So some of you know that my daughter's married to a Lebanese man, and he's Druze Lebanese, which is a sect of that came out of Islam that believes in reincarnation. And I am given a lot of stories from them, but in a paper that was done by researchers similar to Ian Stevenson, there was a story about 2 clans from the Shuf Mountains And the clans were like for us, the McCoys and Hatfields, you know, they were after each other. And so in one life, in this one experience, a man was killed by the other clan, and somehow he was then reborn into the clan that killed him. Imagine what that must feel like. He had, from the moment he was born, he had animosity towards his own father and the clan. And so much so that at one point in time when they were negotiating whatever, he killed the father and several members of the clan. And I say to them, you know, yes, you guys believe in reincarnation, but are you learning the lessons from it? So one day I hope to be able to go to Lebanon and share some of these things that that I've learned with them. Next slide. And then there's guilt. And so again, that's what happened with my father when he saw in the Mahjong room there was a television, and on the television, don't ask me how this happened. I can't even imagine how this happens, but to me this is how amazing the universe is. So on the television screen, he's seen a scene of me writing the story about his funeral and crying buckets of tears because of course it brought up all of the trauma that I experienced in my childhood. He's seeing that and he's realizing that, oh, I didn't get away with it. You know, he had planned this elaborate funeral, did all the rituals, Buddhist and Christian, cover all the bases, and it didn't work. There he was. So when we have a better understanding of what these spirits are going through, when we bring our awareness to them, just like, you know, we have this whole movement about mindfulness, bringing your awareness, your mindfulness to what's going on in your physical world. When we have an awareness of what's going on to these beings who are around us, these unwanted hitchhikers, as Tom says, then we know that there's more to this world than just these physical experiences. So just like if we don't take care of our bodies, we get sick. And if we don't care of our minds, if we have our heads in the clouds, we can be attacked unexpectedly. Next slide. Okay, what kinds of conditions create the portal? So this is the reason why I cleared the room before you all came in and why I did the white light of protection, so that we do not have a portal in this space. And I hope you do feel safe. But when you open yourself in many ways, then you allow a portal of vulnerability. Illness is one of the ways that that opens you up. And you know, I wish in our healthcare practice that we also included healing touch, holding the energy. We think of prayers, but there's even much more proactive stuff that we can do when someone is ill. Next. And addictions, I think I talked enough about that. But if you know someone who has an addiction, know that they have taken on a challenge in this lifetime, and hold the energy for them to meet that challenge head on, because it is possible to heal. I mentioned that my ex-husband was very open to all of these things. And when I discovered Brian Weiss, I asked my ex-husband to go with me to a Brian Weiss workshop. And so we did some healing work around why we needed to be together and why he needed to experience what he did. And he was eventually able to overcome his demons. I use that word loosely. So emotional upset. Boy, we have a lot of that going on lately, don't we? And I know that when I personally become upset, rather than dealing with the upset, I put that aside, I put it on the back burner, and I do what I have many practices to help me get grounded and centered. And I keep doing whatever I need to do until I am grounded and centered. And then I will come back and pull that issue in front of me and look at it. And unfortunately, with the pandemic, that's opened us up to so much emotional upset with the war in Ukraine, with our political situation, with all of these mass killings. It's a challenge. But whenever I ask, what can I do to help in any of these situations, it's always to come back to be centered, to hold the energy, and to heal myself. So think about if we do this collectively. Powerful stuff. So here's the place that caught my attention. After years of living meditatively, I was dealing with some health issues myself and finally got to the place where I needed surgery in 2019. And at that time, it was still challenging for me to ask for help. So I went into the surgery thinking I can handle this. I did ask my daughter to help me, but my daughter's more left brain, so she's not on board with me with a lot of these things. And in that surgery, I came out of it with a feeling that was unbelievable. I knew something was off. And it showed up every time I had to go into the doctor's office. And I realized, oh, I've got that thing they call white coat syndrome. But it was more. That was just one layer to the experience. And fortunately, I've been guided through the healing process of that, which I'll talk a little bit more about that. When you have she's asking, what is white coat syndrome for the people on Zoom? It's when you have a fear of people who wear white coats. Something, and it can be a small trauma, but it can be a big trauma. And so there's this fear that builds up, and you put it on the back burner, you hide it in your subconscious, and then you wonder, why do my hands sweat whenever I need to go to the doctor? And why do I get those knots in my stomach every time I think of anything medical? With some people, it can be so bad that they will postpone doing medical treatment, which is not good either. So, good question, thank you. So trauma, that was part of my journey because I experienced childhood trauma. I won't go into the details of that, but it was an evolutionary process for me. And right now, look at all of the trauma that the world is experiencing. And so this is in part what shows me that we are in an age of transformation. Now we can look at those traumatic things and we can make them evil. Or we can look at them and say, you know what, this is an opportunity for me to rise above it. And when we can ask clearly to the universe, to those people around us who we trust, help me, guide me, show me what I can do, we can get through all of it. when I began this work, I thought, oh, my life was meant to be a life of suffering. Because of the trauma, I was in that victimization mode, but the universe guided me. I really surrendered and opened up. And so the universe guided me so skillfully. I could only take so much at a time, but there was that right person, that right thing, that right book that guided me to where I am today. And I feel like I'm not even the same person I was 32 years ago. Next one. So not only do we have the trauma, but then there's the post-trauma. So we have these wonderful coping mechanisms that help get us through the trauma. And that's what happened to me when I was young. But then in 1977, those memories started bubbling up. I did try to talk to mental health practitioners about this, but for some reason they were not as open to working in that area. I don't know if it wasn't their expertise and they just didn't tell me that. But when I finally found regression therapy, now I started really getting some good results. Funerals. Funerals are sad for many reasons. One of the reasons being is that when someone dies and we have unresolved issues with that being, that doesn't go away when they get buried in the ground or cremated or whatever. And so that's what kept coming up for me. And unbeknownst to me, also coming up on the other side for my father. Go ahead. I mentioned boundaries. If you have experienced emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, boundaries is a huge issue. And think about it, if you don't have good boundaries with people in the physical world, what are your boundaries going to be like with people in the non-physical world? So when I began opening up, that was the first thing that I had to learn. Unfortunately, when I was 17 and I was playing on the Ouija board, I didn't know that. And my girlfriend and I got so good that we could do one finger each on the Ouija board, and we would have fascinating conversations. But this one time I got bored with the conversation, and I looked off, and the next thing I know, my friend and my sister are screaming because my hand is levitating and pulling me off in the direction. And as soon as I saw it, I screamed too, and I knew that, oh, if I go off in that direction, I'm going to die. And so for that brief moment, I had allowed something to pull my hand, but I didn't know about spiritual hygiene at 17. Now, spirit releasement therapy is not for the faint of heart, but if you're at that place where you're ready to do some deep dives, it is a wonderful process. Like I said, it's a healing process for both the spirit and also the subject. The benefits are that when you have an attachment, there's a part of you that's been suppressed. And when you let go of that attachment, that part can now click into its rightful place. And spirit releasement therapy looks a lot like in our world what we call parts therapy. So it's reintegrating those parts. When you do that, your energy surges. Not only your energy, but your creativity. Letting go of energy that does not serve your highest good. How many times do we hear that in our spirit work? Not letting go of energy that does not serve our highest good. Just like we don't think a second thought about saying that the earth revolves around the sun, right? That old way of thinking does not serve us. But how many thoughts do we have that no longer serve us? When we come into this place where we let go of these things that do not serve us, and particularly the attachments, this is what I hear so often in the training is, wow, I have my sovereignty. I have my power back. So if you feel powerless at all, that's a signal that there could be something pulling your energy. And then, as I mentioned before, once you do this work, you know to set clear boundaries. That's a beautiful place to be. I love Carlos Castaneda's word for that, discernment. Can we be discerning? And then the best part is, when we clear these energies, we really can become channels of our higher self. And I really believe this is what our purpose on this earth is, to become channels of the divine in this physical world. And when that happens, magic begins to happen. We attract people and things into our lives, like waking up that morning and hearing those words, and then finding out that Holly was now doing her training online. So I was able to, after 18 years of waiting, finally being able to do the training. So here's the good part. How can you know if a spirit or energy is attached to you? Just look at this checklist and make a note to yourself about, if you have no problem, that would be a 0 that you put in that line. If you have maybe sometimes a problem in this area, that would be a 1. And if this is an ongoing thing, that would be number 2, a yes, or most of the time, or always. Let's take a few moments to go through that list. Let me read them off to you. I'll read them off to you. Okay, number 1, persistent lack of energy. You find yourself sleeping a lot or just drained of energy. Number 2, a change in personality or behavior. Number 3, speaking in a voice that you know is not you. Number 4, if you refer to we rather than I, that's one of the stronger indications. Number 5, if you know you have substance and abuse problems. Number 6, impulsive behavior. Number 7, memory problems. 8, poor concentration. Mind flits from here and there. And it makes me wonder if people with ADHD have some of that issue. Where am I? 9, anxiety or depression with no discernible reason. Number 10, onset of physical problems with no obvious reason or cause. 11, you've been hospitalized and you have a tough time recuperating, or you even have new pains and behaviors after the operation or hospitalization. And 12, emotional and physical reactions to these questions. to this topic. That happened to me when I was in class. I got off a little bit on the numbering, but that's okay. Yeah, 13 was the reaction. So if you scored 10 or more on this quiz, that's an indication. Now, if you scored under 10, right? But now here's the tough one. Number 2, number 3, number 4, or number 10. If you scored 2 on any of those questions, we need to talk. Those are high indications of that there's an attachment. No, 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 no. Yeah, she was saying that married people often say we. Right. Exactly. Yeah. And that's what I love about William Baldwin's book. He writes it in a way to help discern, especially for mental health practitioners, if it is more of a psychotic issue or whether it's a spirit attachment. And until he wrote that book, it was kind of like going into a fog, not knowing. And yet, when you can release the detachments, then you can clearly see a change in the person and be able to know that, okay, this is not a psychotic issue, that this was an energy that was overwhelming the person. Ooh, that's a really good one. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Now that gets more into my zone because I do trainings on intuitive development, and so there's a way to discern clairaudience versus another being's voice. Yeah. But so she asked about number 3, and that one was voices speaking to you and how to discern whether it is clairaudience, which is hearing voices. And actually, even in spirit releasement technology, therapy, we have a way of discerning whether the beings who come to help are higher beings or lower. Because sometimes lower beings will come in and pretend that they're higher. So that's a whole nother part of it. Yeah, Marilyn? So Marilyn's question is, can you have an attachment and God consciousness at the same time? And the answer is absolutely. We are God consciousness. That is our true nature. But we're also physical beings. And just like we change our clothes, we get dirty, we pick up things, we can pick up entities as well. Yeah. Yes, I will. Reaction to the questions. No. Okay. Um, can you hold that question? Okay. So how many of you scored more than 10? You can raise your psychic hand, I'll feel it. Sure, sure. Yeah. And there is no judgment. There is absolutely no judgment. It's just where one is on the path. So when we can bring our awareness to it, and especially with the spirit releasement, not only is there no judgment, but there's also a way out, a way to transform. That's the beautiful part about this. And in fact, consider when people go through depossessions and exorcisms and shoo the spirit out of the person, guess what? Those beings go find someone else. So, and I had that happen with one of the people that I was in a practicum with. A spirit, she was in an ayahuasca ceremony, and a spirit who was attached to someone else came and found her. Yeah. So now what does the process look like? So we've done two of the processes. We put the white light of protection around us, and we did the body scan. The third part of the process, and this is where it differs from depossession and exorcism, is we actually communicate with the energy. And we invoke its higher self. Clergy and many shamans will tell you, oh no, we don't do that. But if you know how to do it, it is so empowering for both. In the third step, we dialogue with the spirit. And we do this for a couple of reasons. We want to help that spirit resolve its needs. That's one of the first things we ask it. What do you need? That's why it's still hanging around. Its needs have not been met. And I think I compared this with parts therapy earlier, but in parts therapy, we actually go back to aspects of our own self where our needs were not met. Inner child work, for instance, but any traumatic experience, you've heard of fight or flight, but there's also freeze. And when we're in a traumatic experience, a part of our energy freezes in that experience. Because in consciousness, it knows that, hey, space and time, that's a construct. It's there until we're ready to go back and address it. So we try to help the entity resolve the emotional conflicts or help it meet its needs. And then we ask, what are the circumstances that connected you with the subject? And as we mentioned about the various portals of vulnerability, those come up. It's amazing how they come up and show. They really want to talk, so they'll tell you all of these details. And then the next part is to discover the client's vulnerability, the part within them that attracts that energy. Because that's what's showing up, what needs to be healed within the subject. And then we want to check out how these things have affected the person in this life. So remember I told you that in the surgery in 2019, I realized, I had the white coat syndrome. And in my training, we went back to my birth. The first people that I saw as I was born were in white coats. I was born during the miscegenation laws in San Francisco, so I had to be born in the Chinese hospital. My father would not have been allowed in the white hospital. And as a Amerasian, I look very different than the typical Chinese babies. And my remembrance was that they were shocked. And they, their wording about what they experienced in witnessing me made me feel less than. And unbeknownst to myself, I carried that energy for many, many years. And then every time I saw someone with white coats, I associated that experience with that energy of not being wanted. So you can see it can have ongoing effects that we're not aware of. This is where I love hypnotherapy work so much, is because we get to dig into the subconscious aspects of ourselves. The fourth step is to do use various modalities to help you release and then to seal your own energies. Just think about if you have an open wound, you want to clean out the wound, you want to put some salve on it to help it heal, and then you let nature take its course. And we do a similar thing in our work. And then we end by adding post-hypnotic suggestions and offering suggestions for self-care, because it's not all finished at that moment. There needs to be an ongoing process of taking care of ourselves. Now come back to the, go to slide 39. Come back to your original body scan. We won't be able to go through the whole process, especially that number 3 process, but we can do a little bit of work here. Notice that energy, particularly those of you who felt it around your throat, because we had several people that had that. Notice that energy that you felt in whatever place that you sense something going on in your body. And now in your vivid imagination, know that you can talk to that energy. So very gently, with compassion and unconditional love, ask it, what are your needs? What are you trying to show me? Good. And now call on your higher self and this energy's higher self and ask it, what can we do collectively to help heal this energy, to bring it to a higher level of being so that we can all live our best potential? And even if you did not have a space, then help us hold the energy for those who did. Let us all call on the highest energies that we know. There are so many angelic beings around us who are willing to assist us, but we must ask. You know that saying, ask and ye shall receive. You might even feel their presence around this room, holding the energy for you. You don't even have to know how. Just allow that energy to come into your being. Let it bathe your body with unconditional love. Notice now if you feel any shifts in your body. Sometimes just a quick jerk, a yawn, a tear, a warmth will manifest. For me, it's often tears of joy, tears of truth. And now bring your awareness back to that place in your body. And remember that scale that we looked at earlier, from 0 to 10, 0 being the lowest and 10 being the highest. Notice if there was any shift in that energy in your body. Good. So those of you who shared what your experience was initially in the body scan, when you come back into ordinary awareness, if you'd like to share anything. Yes, please. Some are having a hard time coming back. Sorry about that, my hypnotic voice. Can't help it. Yeah, please.
Okay, my daughter is having an issue. Anyway, we won't go into it. There's not enough time. But I've had this throat issue. I'm a Taurus, so this is my throat chakra. And it comes back to not being able to speak as a child, not to be able to speak up for myself. And I realized that she felt the same way. So she's in therapy now, but if she could do this work and clear it, I mean, she never felt like she was heard. So, we have a parallel. We're kind of soul mates in a way too. So we have a similar thing to clear up. And I would like to work with you to see how we can do that.
Yeah, and I sort of sense that she's an empath as well.
Carole, I'd like to ask, how do you know if what you're dealing with is a spirit issue or if it's just simply your own baser human nature, or does it matter?
Good question. So think of what you just said, baser human nature. Until we integrate our divine with our human beings, our bodies, minds, and spirits, our energies are lower energies. So any lower energy that's getting our attention is worth looking at. So that's why I say I don't think of this just in the terms of thinking of demons or dark energies. It's all lower energies. So sometimes it's a minor lower energy, sometimes it's a more significant lower energy. But the more we clear all of these lower energies, the more that we are not only helping ourselves, but we're helping the evolution of humanity. So good question. Hold on one second. Sorry about that. We almost lost the mic.
So sort of piggyback on what the other woman had to say, I think clinicians in the mental health field, the DID is not really the psychosis like schizophrenia. And I think a lot of times what it could be also, it can be the DID with the inner child work, but also if I think a soul goes in at a very early point it's more integrated into what you see as the personality in the physical realm. So it gets very complicated to release a true entity that had a name from a previous life within that, also the person that was just born. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I totally agree, and I wish that every, not only mental health practitioner, but I know we've got a lot of body workers in the room, and I'll find out when Holly does the next SRT training. It is a wonderful training. It's only $300. I cannot recommend it too much, and I put the link to HCH, or Dan did, in the chat, in the upper portions of the chat. So I really recommend it, and I will, get the word out the next training that happens. Marilyn.
That was excellent information about clearing your lower energies. By the way, easier said than done. And my second part is, it didn't answer my question. How do you know what is your lower energies and what's really a demon, a spirit demon?
Right. We have a protocol of questions that we go through to help a person identify that. It's more complicated to try to do here in this session. And also, it can trigger. So I purposely didn't go into a lot of detail in step number 3, which includes that. Yeah.
If someone is interested, could they get information about that protocol?
Through
myself?
through a session, yeah. We don't just send the information out because it needs to be guided. So,
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
I'm going to give you how to connect with me at the end of the talk. I just have a few more slides. Go ahead, Wilma.
Okay, I said, like, what came up was electricity as a trigger, like an electricity shock. But while I was writing that, I was like, well, what about the new Wi-Fi? And the other word that came up is Wei Qi. Have you, is that what you are realizing, that we have like a weakened Wei Qi, or is that not a word that you use at all?
So sometimes the answer is I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not an expert about 5G and Wi-Fi, so I don't know the answer to that. And I'm not familiar with how, maybe it's the way you're pronouncing it, Wei Qi.
Yeah, it's like the energy around your body. And so when you get an electrical shock at that spot, your Wei Qi is weakened. And so that is how an entity or something could come in.
If that were the case, that would probably be because you were susceptible long before that. That just
or
like
it was
opened the
meant to
door.
be. You're right. Yeah, it
You're
opened the door.
susceptible.
So it's like you have a weak spot.
Susan, did you have a question?
I'm not sure exactly how to word this question, but it goes back to the yin yang that you were talking about, because I always think about, like, well, we're supposed to talk about being the light and all of that, but what about the dark? What about the yin? And so I don't know, my operational theory has been that these dark entities and our darker spacer instincts that you mentioned earlier are our yin, and that's where we go through that in order to open it up and to bring it into the light. And but it's a constant back and forth process. We have to keep going in there. So it doesn't seem like we're supposed to just eliminate the dark or always avoid it, but in some ways embrace it so that we can become more the light. But I don't.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you.
That's why I used that yin yang symbol in the beginning, because rather than suppress these dark energies, what we want to do is understand them and integrate. All energies, whether we label it as dark or what have you, it has a positive and negative side anyway. And if you look at the yin yang symbol, in the white mass, there is a dark circle, and in the black mass, there is a white circle. And it's a constant reminder to us to stay balanced, that these energies, think about it, if you plug in a cord to an electrical outlet, that's a wonderful example of yin yang, that you're plugging in two opposite energies together to create a force. And so our understanding of these things is so minuscule. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this talk. Like I said, like Tom said, I was planning it for another organization. And then when this thing happened, I said, oh, I know they're working to make this happen. So at the next talk I'm going to be doing about it, which was several months down the road, I'll actually go into more experiential work around it. Yeah, slide 40, please. Yeah. Next one. So when I did the body scan, just to kind of show you, when you practice, some of you may feel like, oh, I didn't get anything. So, but when you practice it, then you'll be surprised what comes up. So here's what came up for me when I did a practicum about this. I saw a dark blue stone, and in the dark blue stone was this Chinese character, which is the word Jia, which means family. I've been doing some genealogy research and actually took some Chinese language school, and so I've learned to read some things. So I knew this word because actually that's my father's name too, Jia. Next slide. Then when I asked that stone and that Jia symbol what it means, I saw this. And I won't say the Chinese for this because I don't speak it as well as I can read it. But what it means is, when you drink water, remember the source. When you drink water, remember the source. Now, I knew that saying because when I started doing my genealogy and joined a roots group to go back to my family's village, that is their saying. And what it means is that when you drink from the well of your village, to remember all those who've come before you, who have created that well. But on a larger scale, it means that we're so connected with our families. So when we saw those words, then all of a sudden my facilitator guided me into the next step, which took me into my life between life experience just before this life. Imagine what that would be like. Seeing your life between life experience, knowing, wow, I'm setting up this life. And so he recognized right away that this was my form of the Akashic records. And he knew that not only could we glean information about why I chose the challenges that I chose in this lifetime, but we could glean even more. And so then the next step that he guided me to was a lifetime in the 1900s. And I know Mary Grace is on the Zoom, and she'll relate to this because in the 1900s, this character, Caroline, was part of the Theosophical Society. And lately, she's been pushing me to study Theosophy more and more. And there's some really good Theosophical teachers online right now. And what she said to me as we had the conversation was, you can study this stuff, you can read this stuff, and then that's where she died. She didn't have an experience of it. But she says, now that I've had an experience of it, through this communication with you. Now I get it. So I'll repeat that. You can study something, you can hear about it, but it's not the same until you experience it. Then it sinks in, doesn't it? And then we went into what my soul contract was, and we saw the masters, and then he took me back to that surgery in 2019. And that had been my intention. I could, even though I had done a lot of healing work during the previous training, I knew there was still some residual energy. So when you become sensitive to energy, even the residual energies can affect you. And so my intention for the session with him was to clear the residual energy from that surgery. And as we did that, we realized that the energy that was still stuck there was a thought form, not a dark energy, but a thought form energy. And it was the energy of distrust. My birth experience brought up that energy, and other experiences I had throughout my life brought up that energy of distrust. And then it brought back even closer at home to the schisms that I had had with my friends. That not being able to communicate with one another to help us both heal, the healing process, again brought up that trust issue. And I took it as an opportunity to heal. So with all of that energy and information and experience, now he was also a Reiki worker, so he held the energy for me. And the next thing I know, I'm feeling an energy like a supernova. Yeah, like a supernova. And then all of a sudden I realized, oh, I'm in oneness. That beautiful experience of oneness. I call it the shadowless light because, you know, as we were talking about light and dark, when I experience oneness, I just see all of this light, or experience all of this light, but there's no shadow to it. So it's different than just the duality of light and dark. And that's when I knew that the healing work had been done. And then we sent that same energy out to everyone. Because, like I said before, in this work, it's a quantum level of energy. And then, next slide. So it's very important to do the self-care. I won't go into all of those because I know we're running on time, beyond time. But I'll post these, this list and the quiz list. We'll post those on Facebook. Remember I said that Ho'oponopono was an energy that I use to help me when I don't know what's coming up. I'll feel something bubbling up, but I won't know what it is. Then I come back to Ho'oponopono. Next slide. So just to quickly let you know what Ho'oponopono is, again, we have the attachment to the link for a Ho'oponopono exercise, but in 4 simple sentences: I'm sorry, I forgive you, I thank you, I love you. Now, you're not just saying this to the other person, you're saying this to yourself too. So that's why Ho'oponopono, that double saying of those words, it means to make doubly right. And I find that helps clear my energies. I have no control over the other person's energies, but it helps clear my energies. So I just want to end with a poem from John O'Donovan, Come Back to Yourself. May all that is unforgiven in you be released. May your fears yield their deepest tranquilities. May all that is unlived in you blossom into a future graced with love. Now remember that white light of protection again. That solar light that is within you. Feel it radiate through all the parts of your body to those places where you brought your awareness to. Let it radiate out beyond you. And know that you are loved. You are protected. You are the light. So I want to remind you about my books, and today, and it will end tomorrow sometime, I forget exactly what time, the ebook version of Unstuck in Time will be half price on Amazon. If you don't read anything else in that book except chapter 10, which is called Connecting the Dots, I hope you'll read it. That's fine. I do. Yeah, and it's on my website also. So I now have 2 offices, one in Carytown and one in the West End, where I do my work and teach classes and do workshops. So I hope I'll see you at one of these places, and feel free to contact me by email if you have questions that come up afterwards. I'm open to address those. And as I mentioned, always come back to the center of your being, which is your soul, your true self, your divine nature. And so I want to
I'm
thank.
sorry.
Hold on one moment, please.
Yes.
I want to thank you all for coming, Ions, for allowing me to share this information, all of you who have joined us on Zoom, and especially Dan for all the technical stuff. I know what that's like, so thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you for holding such wonderful energy, because I know this can seem like a heavy topic, but you've made it lighter. Thank you. And we're running over, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Wilma, you had a question?
wanted to thank you. Yes, I wanted to thank you. You're an answer to prayer. And I wanted to tell everybody that next week is the Unity 10-year anniversary at Unity Church. And I would like you, if you wouldn't mind, if you're going, would you be willing to bring a handout of your what you were handing out? Because I'm in Charlotte, so I don't have the handout, and I was so curious about it. So this gives the whole message, and I really thank you for all your information.
Thank you, Wilma. Any other questions? Yes. So most of the people, when they do the process of their near-death experience, and by the way, I have a speaker. I also do the Reincarnation Symposium. This year will be the last weekend of October. One of the speakers there is a regression therapist who actually works with people who have near-death experiences to help them glean more information out of their experience. So once you do the process of remembering your near-death experience, we find, just like my father did, the hell disappears, just evaporates. So, but if they're holding on to it, if they still have that memory, then it hasn't been fully processed. Yeah, good question. Mhm. I know, they're mental constructs. And see, this is the thing that people don't realize what goes on the other side, how your thoughts can create very real. It's, we have now virtual realities. This is their virtual reality. Yeah. But it can disappear just as easily as it can appear. Mm-hmm. Oh, goodness. Yeah. So she asked about the near-death experience and how those hellish experiences, still persist. So, we're beings of free will. And just like I can work with you in a session, but if you have a strong will and you persist in holding on to that negative energy, guess what? It's going to come back. Until you are willing to be a participant in the process fully and completely, you will manifest whatever you need to manifest. And sometimes you can only do it in stages. And so I have a way of gauging how much is left to work with. And I'll ask in a session, is this as much as we can do today? Or is this complete? So I have a way of gauging that. And again, there's no judgment. If a person can only let go of 30, 50, 70% and still for some reason needs to hold on to that other percent, it's your process. That's your active part in the whole process. So you do whatever you can. Does that answer your question? Any other questions? Again, thank you so much for allowing me to share this, and I hope it plants some seeds for you to think about. And sometimes like a cow, you got to ruminate on it and see what you want to swallow and what you want to spit up. But thank you so much for allowing me to share.
And you all have fun tonight at your house, Tom. I am so jealous I can't be there. I
Well,
hope
come on
there's
up for it.
music there. Oh, I'm not coming down. I'm coming next week.
Well, the weather's so perfect. We're going to have music outside this year instead of in the basement. It's going to be great. And it will also be a more gentle experience for those who are worried about COVID. You'll be out in the fresh air.
Yeah. Well, you have fair weather. You have beautiful weather. And you have fair warning that I'm coming next week to the Richmond area.
Wonderful. Okay. First of all, I forgot when I was up here at the beginning of the meeting to ask about love offerings and so forth. And for those of you who are online, we've already passed the basket for love offerings in the room. For those of you who are online, that can be done through our PayPal function on our website at richmondions.com. And also, anybody who is online or otherwise who would prefer to write a check rather than use PayPal, a check can be written to either Sally Youngs, our treasurer, or to Richmond Ions, and mailed to me at the address on the email that goes out, the transmittal email. It's on all the monthly transmissions, and it will find its way into our coffers, and we appreciate all the donations that people can make to keep our stuff going here. Next month, we're going to have another great program. It's going to be Jim McCarty, who was the sole surviving member of the trio that brought us the raw material, or the Law of One material, back in the channelings that occurred between 1980 and 1984. And he was married to Carole Louie, who was the primary channel in that group, although Jim himself is a channel. And he's going to be talking about the process they went through and how that information came in. It's going to be a really great presentation. He's in Louisville. He will be coming to us by Zoom. We still will be meeting in person though. And then in August we've got another wonderful speaker that Carole lined up for us, Chang-Shen Lee, about a history of reincarnation among a particular group in China. In September, we've got Scott Moore, who is a Richmond-based tantric energy practitioner. And so anyway, thank you for coming, everyone. There's a potluck lunch here for those who are here. I again remind you, at the instigation of Bunny, I have gone and hand corrected all the invitations on the table. So they all now read Saturday instead of Friday. And so no one can look at it and get confused anymore. And I hope to see all of you at the party tonight that are here, and many of you who are online as well. And it is a potluck dinner occasion, but it should be a great event, and hope you all come out. Thank you very much. See you next month.